Live from the Carol Blute room. Anyway, thanks for coming, Tom. I want to introduce our chair of the Board of Selectmen, Tom Hurley. He's here to talk to us this evening about Articles 1, 2, 3, and 6, and any other words of wisdom he might have on debt capacity or anything like that. We will be happy to hear. But we also have business to take care of so that we can get this warrant to the printer in time for it to get to the households of the town. So the first two articles are related. They have to do with appointment and appointment protocol and interview selection protocol for the chief of police. The town bylaw needed changing, and we have to petition the legislature for them to change one of their acts of 1989, I believe,
1989, yes.
to substitute terms like the Board of Selectmen with town administrator. So and I think this all stems from our article from last spring establishing a strong town administrator. But I will let Tom fill us in and answer any questions.
Okay, that's easy, exactly what you said.
Oh, that's all there was to it?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's housekeeping, and you're correct. The last May, we passed or we voted a home rule petition to go to the state legislature, which is going to be heard tomorrow, actually, to transition to a strong town administrator form. And at that town meeting, a couple of things were raised, and I think rightly so. Originally, our police chief was civil service, and back in 1989, I believe it was when we got the chief position out of civil service and had a home rule petition to do that, and had a new selection process. So the acts of 1989, Chapter 272, is the home rule petition that was filed back in 1989, which basically gave the authority for the appointment and selection of a police chief to the Board of Selectmen. That came back positive, and then subsequent to that, we enacted a general bylaw in Chapter 20 of our bylaws on the process, the actual detailed process of how to select a police chief. And again, it was the Board of Selectmen controlling that. With the transition to a strong town administrator, the Board of Selectmen will no longer have the responsibility for actually hiring the police chief. That responsibility will shift to the town administrator. The Board of Selectmen will still have veto power over it for a certain period of time. I can't remember if it's 15 days or 20 days or something like that. But short of that, it will be the town administrator. So this is housekeeping, just really to replace the word Board of Selectmen with the word town administrator. And that's pretty much it.
Okay, I just have one observation that was actually brought up by one of our committee members who couldn't make it tonight. And he was surprised to notice in this bylaw, which must date from
89, probably, or 90 or somewhere around there, yeah.
He was surprised that the qualifications for a police chief were
8 years of service,
and also that he had to be on the Milton
yes, that was
force.
and in terms of getting it was mandatory to get it out of civil service. It would not have come out of civil service otherwise. That's my understanding.
Because it seemed to me if you had the deputy chief of Boston and a Milton resident or something, you know,
Right, that's my understanding.
Qualified to do this, but anyway,
Anne Marie may know better. Is that
town
correct?
meeting approved it in its current form. That's how it was presented at town meeting, and that's how it was approved.
I'm just wondering if there was any reason for requiring that a new chief. I mean, when Boston gets a new chief of police, they don't look necessarily within Boston ranks.
Right.
Now, Boston's a little bigger, granted, but you know, if we needed to snag a deputy chief from Boston to become our chief, that might not be a horrible thing, especially if they are a Milton resident.
Right. No, we have to look from within Milton, and it is mandatory. I mean, it's,
It'd probably serve us well, it just seems.
yeah, it would require a new home rule petition, I think, because right now, that is the law of the land in terms of Milton. Because I believe that the Acts of 1989 actually state that. So we can't vary off of that without changing that.
Okay, well, that answers that question. So we have Article 1, which is on the board, recommended that the town vote to amend Chapter 20 of the general bylaws. Michael?
Tom, we were discussing these articles at the Rotary Club of Milton earlier today, and one of the Rotary members wanted to pass along a question about the article which mentions that one position will be reserved for somebody from the Personnel Board. She noted that she thought that the Personnel Board was going away with the
No.
creation of a strong town administrator,
No, it
which
is
I
not.
told her was not my understanding, but I said I'd pass along the question.
Right. I mean, there has been some talks about it, but no, the strong town administrator does not supersede the
Right.
personnel board.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom on Article 1? Lee, Michael?
I move that we recommend a yes vote on Article 1 as written.
Second.
Any further discussion? No? All in favor? Great, thank you very much. Okay. Article 2. Article 2 is much of the same, but this is the one that petitions the general court to change the acts of 1989 to do the same thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, Article 2, the home rule petition, is what made Article 1 possible, basically.
Right. So, and there's a lot less text, so we're only looking at 2 substitutions here for Board of Selectmen by town administrator. Any questions for Tom on this article? Mike?
This is another question that came from the Rotary Club meeting. What kind of review does the Board of Selectmen have over this temporary appointment? Is it initially like 15 days to veto it? Is that where that happens? Because
Well, this isn't just temporary appointment. This is the selection process for a permanent police chief, as well as temporary. It could be either. But it certainly is the process by which we will hire the next police chief.
And the question is, what role does the Board of Selectmen play in that process as far
Under
as
the
reviewing it?
new town administrator,
Yeah,
a member of the Board of Selectmen will have a seat on the committee, the selection committee.
okay.
But beyond that, in terms of the actual final decision to hire, will be with the town administrator. So all the selectmen would have would be that 15-day veto power.
Okay, so the question was about reviewing, so I guess supposing this is up to 5 years on a temporary appointment, going into 3 years, do they have any role at that point?
It would be very unusual to have a 5-year temporary appointment. And again, the idea
I
is,
think it sounded long too, but
Yeah,
it says it in the thing, so.
yeah, it can be up to 5. I mean, typically a temporary appointment is just, when the police chief leaves suddenly, when there isn't enough time to, so immediately there would be a committee convened to elect appoint a new permanent chief. But in that interim, you could have an interim appointed. So it could be a year, I mean, it provides for up to 5 years, but it'll be extremely unusual that you'd ever have.
Okay, so to answer the question about what review the Board of Selectmen have, it's the 15 days.
15 days, yep.
Okay.
So, I'm just wondering if there's some people at the Rotary Club that would like to serve on the Warrant Committee. But anyway, thank you, Michael. Lee, Michael?
I move that we recommend a yes vote on Article 2 as written.
Second.
Hey, several seconds. There we go. Any further discussion? Nope. All in favor? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Article 3 is now a little different. And I've passed out a handout on that for you. I'll beam this up as well.
Just a little history to Article 3.
Please.
We were, in the Capital Committee last year, we were kind of batting around, because we had to add additional money. Originally, the Capital Committee had recommended one pool of money and let the cemetery and the DPW facility figure out how to build either a combined facility or separate facilities with the money given. And for whatever reason, they just didn't play well together. And
Yeah, it was
never
wishful
happened.
thinking, I think.
Yeah. So we were stuck with appropriating more money for it. I realized at the time, we've been kicking around this wind turbine now for 3 years, and and we knew there was money there that hadn't been spent, 350 approximately. So that's where the idea came from. Let's get the selectmen to abandon the project, because we had looked at it, and we could still build it. We still can build it if we want. So the arbitrator didn't say we couldn't build the wind turbine, just said you can't run it for 50% of the time. And the 50% of the time you can't run it is when the most wind occurs. We could run it during the winter. Couldn't run it during the daytime. You could run it at night after golfing is over. It was, so, our specialist that we had didn't run the numbers exactly, but there was no way anybody was willing to go out on a limb and say that we could even break even on the operation of a wind turbine and pay the debt service and contribute any money. So that's where it sat for the past 4 years. So that's why we did it. He said, before the debt gets all paid off, let's see if we can use the money for something else, and that made the most sense, because one of the things you have to do is you've got to find a capital project that is similar in useful life to the capital project you're abandoning in order to repurpose the money, and that one did kind of fit the bill.
So we'll include this in the comments, but this was a $6,250,000 authorization, of which $1,350 was bonded, and $986 was spent, leaving $363,000 available.
Actually, slightly more than that was spent, but it was spent under a grant. But I think it was a $200,000 or $300,000 grant also that we had.
I don't want to hear this.
But it was spent.
Okay. Darnell.
Question for you.
Hmm?
What is there left for us to do, and this is because you brought this up in this way, what is it left for us to do with the existing stuff that we have in the ground up there? We already have a tie-in up there. If we were to put a different type of project up there, is that something that we can investigate and look forward to in the future?
Yeah, all the arbitrator's ruling was because the only thing we lost, and there were many court cases over this thing, which we won all the court cases and lost the arbitration case. So yeah, we've got utility poles going up there. I don't know that they have actually been strung with wire or anything. It's still the old access road.
Yes, I know, but then we pay for the tie-in to the. I thought we put paid for to have the tie-in.
The person who would actually know that is sitting in the back of the room. He was very involved with that. That's you.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
No, I was saying, didn't we pay for the tie-in to the electric company up there? We paid to have the tie-in connected from that point.
We never did the tie-in.
Okay, we hadn't done the tie-in. Okay, I thought we had did it already. That's what I was asking.
So that's it. On the recommendation, because we purposely wrote the article to be vague in terms of what to do with the money, because we wanted time for the capital committee to actually make the recommendation, and the recommendation that the capital committee had was to repurpose it for the break room, DPW break room / cemetery break room or whatever it's called. I noticed the recommendation does have a little bit more money going to fire repairs. And again, I have no problem with that as long as that is going to pass muster in terms of the useful life of that project compared to. So I think we might want to just have our bond consultant, Lisa, just kind of weigh in on that is a proper use of that money.
Okay, so the data, the spreadsheet I got on, which backed up Articles 4 and 5 as well.
Yeah,
for
had it going there.
Well, Article 4 not, but Article 5 for repurposing other leftover funds, matched up by useful life, or in the case of the leak correlation equipment in red,
Yes.
match that up to a sewer project.
Correct, yeah.
But you can see here that the blue 363 went to the locker room, the garage, and then 13,000 change
Okay,
started off the fire equipment, the fire building improvement and some repairs.
okay,
So-
and we've got a 30-year term in that, I guess we're saying, yeah, okay.
Right.
So it
So-
would seem to fit it.
Right, well, Jim McAuliffe, our treasurer, told us that that the life of the wind turbine and these other projects were the same,
Yeah.
permissible. So
Yeah,
I will take him at his word.
I will for right now, okay.
So,
Yeah, given the fact, it's a fire station that's going to be torn down, hopefully.
Whoa.
No?
Sidebar.
you never know.
You never know, you're right.
You never know. All three? Who knows? So I have a quick question which may inform writing the comment, and maybe I'll have to get back to you. When the paper detailed the makeup of the 986 sort of sunk cost, their figures added up to 886. It was N-Star, D&C, and legal fees, so it was exactly 100,000 short. Do you happen to know what that, if there was another $100,000 item there that wasn't reported to the paper,
Or
or?
did the paper just make a mistake? I have no idea.
Okay, so I could review that.
Yeah, I mean, Amy has the the town accountant has the information on
Okay,
how that money was spent.
Lee Michael.
I move that we recommend a yes vote on Article 3 as written today.
Second.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion on this article? All in favor? Okay, thank you very much.
That was easy.
Hey, well, it's, Article 5 was nice because we had $180,000 of savings from other projects. This is 363,000. Call it savings since we lost.
Right, it's sunk cost, yeah. I know.
But this is great, because it will mean that $543,000 of projects that were authorized last spring don't need to be bonded with under a new bond, and I believe that will make us give us a little greater capacity going forward.
Right,
Or we will have less debt service, one or the other.
right. It
And-
doesn't change much for, because this stuff won't be bonded, or, what was approved, we banned this year.
Right.
We won't be bonding until August of 16, which will be outside.
Right.
Well, it will be in FY 17, but just the very latter part of FY 17. So all you'll really be getting is the interest expense on a bond for
Right.
6 months, which won't be a lot of money. So it doesn't have a
Or-
huge impact in terms of FY 17, but certainly going forward into 18 and 19 it does.
Great. Any other questions for Tom of a general nature? I mean, I could ask you how we're doing with Hendry's.
No comment.
We hadn't voted Article 5 yet, right?
Yes, we have.
We did?
We'd like to, 6 we'd like to
Article
speak.
4 and 5, we voted
Voted
last week.
I recorded that we voted for, but not 5. Okay, sorry.
Great. Well, we're on TV now, so we can check, but pretty sure we did. So now we're on to Article 6.
Okay, I'd like to have Katie,
and-
just come up and join me.
That'd be great.
Sorry, I did want to ask a general question.
sorry.
Is it too late?
No, let's keep the door open here. Tom, Phil
Yes.
has a question for you while
Yeah,
we're
This is a
shuffling
general
chairs.
question, unrelated to the specific articles we have tonight. I think the members of this committee, and I know the members of other committees, would like to
Sure.
to have an update on what's happening with the OPEB funding. I know that that you met with the treasurer in public session, and
Right,
he has recommended that the money go to the state fund, which is where most communities put it,
right.
and I guess we're just wondering where we are in that
We're
process.
in the process right now of reviewing, and we'll probably take it up at a future board meeting shortly. But we think the best route is to set up an OPEB trust, so to actually set up trustees. And the reason for that is the enabling legislation that allows for funding of OPEB within the state, Chapter 32, Section 20, or something like that, is non-conforming with GASB 45. In order to have a valid, a GASB compliant funded OPEB, the vehicle has to be irrevocable. There is no language that indicates that, under the Mass General Law, that the contributions are irrevocable. So the fear is,
The contributions to the state fund,
well,
or any fund.
if you just don't, if you don't set up a trust and just deal with it through the town, then you've got nothing, you've got no document that says that I have an irrevocable trust or a reasonable facsimile thereof. You know,
Does that need to be done before you place the fund somewhere?
I don't think it needs to be done before you place the funds necessarily, but
Does it affect where you place the funds?
No, it does not. Other than that, the trustees will be the one empowered to make that decision of how to invest. And we differ right now. We've got a couple of versions of it. You know, whether we have all internal trustees, in other words, town treasurer, town administrator, member of the warrant committee, that kind of configuration. You know, similar to the way the capital committee is set up. It's all, for the most part, internal. Or just have all citizens. Yeah, and if you look around at these trusts, you know, it's 50-50. Some are one way, some are another.
Are you considering options to the state in order where to place these funds?
Well, what will happen then is that committee, I believe that the state probably is the best vehicle. But we want to let them vet it out. You know, looking at the state, it's one pool of money, so that, you know, you've got a lot of buying power in terms of buying the investments and a lot of spreading of the risk. And so you can be fairly aggressive in your, you know, or they can be fairly aggressive in their investment strategy, and they certainly comply with the what do you call it, the investment policy.
Prudent investor rule?
Prudent investor rules, yes. It's tough when you get old. You know, that's why I think the state, you know, PRIT makes a lot of sense. There are other funds out there that do the same thing, that specialize in investing of OPEB funds. And I suppose they're worth looking at, but I would think it would have to be, you know, that you would need some persuasive argument to go away from the state towards something smaller.
Any particular timeline we could look at for when this will all happen?
Hopefully shortly. I would say in the next few meetings, like I said, we've each submitted Katie has made some changes to the trust document, the sample trust
To the
document.
treasurer's document,
Yes.
yes.
I've made some, I've got a different one that's similar out there, so, you know, within the next couple of selectmen's meetings, we'll have a discussion about it, and, you know, once we have that, if we go internal, then it's very simple, you know, the trustees are already named, and it just happens. If we have to appoint outside people, then you gotta find them, and that takes time.
Thanks.
Okay, I want to thank Phil for bringing this up because we did discuss it last week with the treasurer. And I just have to say, well, I'm unclear on one thing. But I have to say that last spring, when we considered this article, the Warrant Committee, well, certainly I, was very much under the impression that even though recommendations said town may establish a separate trust fund, that pretty much that was the intent of the article, was that we were going to establish a separate trust fund. All right? And if we weren't already well down that path and decided to do that, I think it would have been nice if the Warrant Committee had heard that there were going to be another half year of deliberations trying to figure out, oh boy, do we want to do a trust fund or not? Because we were certainly under the impression that a trust fund was happening and that it was likely going to PRIT. And to discover now, half a year later, that we're not there, we're not even, you know, it just, I want to, you know, when things like this come up, I really want the Warrant Committee to be given all the information regarding a case or an article up front and unbidden, you know, rather than having it come out piece by piece down the road.
Well, first of all, there is no requirement, there wasn't anything in the article or that required the setting up of a trust. A
No.
trust is not mandatory.
No.
So it had to be vetted out. And it's still in the
But that
process.
vetting out should have...
Because there was disagreement among the selectmen, there was disagreement among the treasurer, there was disagreement among a lot of people whether we should have one, whether we shouldn't have one.
Warrant Committee
And
wasn't aware...
regardless of that, it doesn't make any difference
Excuse me,
with the
Tom.
investment decision.
The Warrant Committee
Oh, no,
was...
you're criticizing us, so
I
I'm
am.
trying to answer you back.
I am.
We acted
We were
prudently
not-
and are acting prudently on it.
We were not aware of any of this debate behind the scenes
There was no debate behind the
There was
scenes.
no debate behind the scenes.
at the time of...
It was in public meetings. And we first became aware that the money was not invested less than a month ago.
No. At the time we were considering this article last spring, okay, we were not aware that there were any issues left to be decided as in terms of whether or not the town should set up a trust. The whole point of the article was to set up a trust.
No, it wasn't.
Well, not the whole point, but...
None of the point of the article was to set up a trust. That was decided later.
What
The
was-
article was to fund GASB 45, fund the OPEB. That didn't mean a trust necessarily, and it's not mandatory.
We were funding OPEB before without this article.
That's correct. As far as the state's concerned, you have to enact, town meeting has to enact the Mass General Law. The state, as far as the state's concerned,
And the
that's
Mass-
all you have to do.
and the
As
Mass-
far as GASB 45, remember, the state has no authority over generally accepted accounting principles. So
Sure.
you may well do that, it may well comply with the state, but it may not meet muster with the auditor who has to give an opinion on whether the financial statements are fairly stated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So that's where the rub came. That we only found out when we had the specialists come in, and that was maybe a month ago.
Yeah, can I just weigh in a bit on last year?
Sure.
The article was submitted by the Government Study Committee. It was not a selectman
Right.
article that we submitted. I don't recall if we were here when you discussed it. We may not have been, or if we were, I don't recall a
We weren't
discussion
part of the
about the
discussion,
state
yeah.
fund, but,
We were here.
all right, maybe we were. I just don't recall the discussion, but we weren't, that wasn't our article, and I don't recall us being asked for our thoughts on that. I can tell you that, going back, Emery, after, I think maybe fall of 2014, you know, we did have a resident of the town who was representing a fund other than the state fund, who had met with the town accountant, the town administrator, met with me and indicated that would like to come in and talk with us if at some point we were going to be investing the OPEB in something other than a stabilization fund. There were some meetings with him. We did tell him that at the appropriate time, that at this point the article had been filed, we said at the appropriate time, you know, that could be considered, but it wasn't ripe at that time, other than from preliminary meetings. So when the selectmen met on this in July, both David Burns and I raised the issue of the fact that we just want to be sure we're doing adequate due diligence on this. It's, you know, we respect your role in the process. I know the government study committee's asked about this. Ultimately, you know, we have a due diligence component, I think, to our obligation as elected officials, and certainly with the town management. So there's the town meeting acted in May. We're only a few months later. The money is invested through the fund, through the advisor, I forget the name of the company that Jim has, the stabilization funds, Abbey Financial.
Right.
So the money's invested, but we
It's
decided
invested
we
like
wanted
all
to do
the
some
town
more due
funds, isn't it?
diligence, and we did have some disagreement at our meeting as to the course we should take. We also had an advisor, Mark Abrams, who was in with us that night, who said that the law may be changing in the month of August, and we may need to think about this trust issue. So there are a few moving pieces here, and I don't recall any discussion, and whether it was a lengthy discussion or not at the time with the Warrant Committee, it probably was with the Town Government Study Committee, and if we were here,
Yeah, we're
I
in
just
the
don't
background.
recall the but I don't think we were directly involved in it, because I don't recall a specific discussion about the state fund versus another
Right.
option.
But the funds are invested.
Yes.
That is the key point. They are invested. They're just not invested as, you know,
They're invested differently than they were before the town meeting?
no, at this point, they're not.
There's been no change?
Yeah, so they're not invested as aggressively as they could or should be at this point. And I do agree with Katie that the person that approached us, the Milton resident, that represents a very large, it's a West Coast-based fund,
Yes.
but is very reputable and has some other towns in Massachusetts that it invests OPEB money for. So it's not, the treasurer does not want to use them because he doesn't want to be dealing with multiple, you know, investment analysts and that type of thing, that, you know, you just would prefer to invest his money, you know, conservatively and with one. He has no problem going into the state fund, but he was very apprehensive about going elsewhere. So, and I do agree with Katie that at least it should be vetted.
No, I appreciate the work you do on these issues and the due diligence you perform. The Warrant Committee just simply wasn't aware that there was a much longer process that needed to be handled after passage of the article. And somewhere along the line, whether we had asked you or not what the process was, it would have been nice to have heard what will the process be once this is passed.
Yeah, and like I said, it's only been a month since we decided, or, you know, since we were told by Mark Abrams, he recommended setting up the trust fund. Otherwise, it would have been the selectmen that would have had the discussion in terms of, or passed off to the treasurer to vet out the other investment vehicles before making the final decision. So that's where we stand right now, is the vetting process. Once that vetting process is over, and I would prefer that vetting process to be done by the trustees if they're the ones that are going to ultimately be responsible for managing the money. And that will take a little bit more time.
But it's not a significant delay. We're talking a few months since town meeting in May.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. It just came as a shock to me that this wasn't all done. Great. So we're on to Article 6.
Yes.
Which is whether or not the Board of Selectmen should be expanded from 3 members to 5. And around that, the Town Government Study Committee has submitted this article, and it's thankfully maybe the only article the Town Government Study Committee has submitted this
This time, yes.
meeting. And we have, full disclosure, one of our Warrant Committee members does also serve on the Town Government Study Committee, Bill Matthews. We also have Peter Mullen from the Town Government Study Committee with us as well. So, I think I can say that I was somewhat surprised to find two more proposed recommendations in my mailbox this afternoon for this. They mirror very closely with one small difference in terms of the titling. The recommendation we looked at last week that the Town Government Study Committee has voted on for their purposes. So I think what I'd like to do is first of all, I want to hear from everybody here who wants to talk about it. But what I'd like to do is think about the actual article as it was proposed and whether or not the Warrant Committee wants to vote that up or down, or send it back to the Town Government Study Committee, or whatever we want to do. And then beyond that, I think people will probably recommend a possible amendment, and that's where the bulk of the discussion might be. So I have the recommendation here that the Town Government Study Committee has voted. And this is recommended that the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to petition the General Court to enact legislation relating to the membership. And it basically says we're changing to 5, and then it details how we get there. Okay? The equivalent version that I received today from Town Council John Flynn is almost identical in language, but it has in between the recommendation and Section 1 and Section 2, it has this nice text here. So that's about substantially the only difference, although it moves one definition from Section 1 down to Section 2. Anyway, either one would be the same practical effect. I don't know. I like this one because it's got the italics. Whatever. But
Do you have a question?
So I don't know. I guess this has changed. We talked about it twice now with the Town Government Study Committee, and we certainly want to talk about it with the Board of Selectmen. They're most affected by it. And do you want to address just the article as proposed, or not?
We'll address the article, what we agree with, what we don't agree with, in terms of the article.
Okay.
And we'll go from there.
Great.
So basically, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie in a second, but basically, we had a lot of conversations with the Town Government Study Committee about the article. Our biggest concern with it was, for the most part, we have no problem going from 3 members to 5 members. Timing was an issue. We're transitioning to a strong town administrator. We think doing that coupled with a 5-member board was a lot of change all at once. We didn't want one to derail the other, and we thought that it possibly could. So the issue wasn't whether we should or shouldn't go 5. It's just first of all, when. we did hash that out. We did compromise that it would be deferred until April of 2017, not April of 2016, in terms of a vote. And then the second issue is that we're still in disagreement with. All three selectmen feel strongly that this is a significant change in the way that the residents of the town will be represented by the selectmen, and that the residents of the town should have an opportunity to weigh in on that. Every time, and the last time we changed, not so much the composition of the Board of Selectmen, but the way the selectmen were elected, that certainly was put out to the town, to the voters of the town. It used to be that all selectmen were elected, was it one-year terms,
Yes.
and so everybody was up for election every single year, and it went to a staggered 3, so that only one selectman is elected, and the entire town weighed in on that. And we think this is at least as significant as that, if not more.
You know when that was?
Yeah, we brought copies for you. We asked the town clerk this question, so we can pass them around. It was in, I kept a copy myself. It was 1986 and 87. So it was a town meeting action, a home rule petition, and then a voter referendum. We asked the town clerk for this information because we did have a discussion about it with the Government Study Committee, and we were very much in favor of, as Tom said, of a voter referendum, and the majority of the Government Study Committee was not. And we happen to think, you know, the last time, 3 decades ago almost, there was a change made to stagger the terms of the selectmen, and we questioned whether that had gone out to the voters or whether it was just a town meeting action. It did go to the voters. I think one of the interesting things is the vote was a lot closer at town meeting than it was in the general electorate. If you back out the blank, the people left the question blank and didn't vote. So I think that indicates that sometimes the town meeting and the voters see things differently, and we think this is an important enough change that the voters should have an opportunity to weigh in. That's our prime reason for wanting to talk with you
Could you
tonight.
articulate that point one more time, the difference in the votes? I was not tracking it.
Well, it was a lot, if you look at the numbers, it was closer, it was a closer call at the town meeting than it was at the voter referendum following year, so however you read that one way or the other,
Okay.
you know, sometimes the town meeting takes one action and the voters may disagree, they may not. They both passed it in this case, but the percentages are different. I just thought that was an interesting fact, but the main point is that we think that if the terms of the selectmen are decided by the voters, then the number of selectmen should be decided by the voters. You know, our question is, you know, why wouldn't there be voter referendum? The Government Study Committee raised some concerns about a delay. We think it's possible. We don't, you know, you can't guarantee it. We don't know for sure, but it's possible that depending on how quickly, assuming the town meeting votes positively and it goes to the legislature, it's possible that the April 2016 ballot might be an option for the ballot question to have this be before the voters. So we don't think that a delay.
If we ask our state rep and state senator to fast track it, they have fast tracked other bills before.
And I happened to watch a tape of your meeting last week and personally agreed with what Darnell said. If there is a delay, that's not the end of the world. We're talking about making an important change and a significant change, and we just feel very strongly, and we were a little bit surprised that the Government Study Committee didn't, or a majority of the Government Study Committee didn't view the voter referendum as being something that they would advocate. So we wanted to come in and talk with you about it. We asked the Warrant Committee to include in your recommendation on this article, assuming that you vote to recommend that the town meeting considers increasing the size of the board, that you include a voter referendum requirement in it.
Lee Michael.
To your knowledge, would it cost the town any money to run that voter referendum?
No.
It'll be on the April
Regular
town election ballot.
so.
There's no additional cost with advertising it, with printing the text?
Pennies of additional ink. I mean, it's,
Mhm.
you know.
And if you watch the tape, you know that I didn't agree with Darnell at that meeting, and one of the main reasons was because I haven't heard anybody opposing this change. I have been talking to all sorts of people all around town about it, and I I asked the Town Government Study Committee, who contacted many towns which have enacted this recently, and I said, when people got up to speak in opposition to this, what were the main concerns that they voiced? And there weren't any concerns registered. And I haven't heard concerns among my fellow constituents, so I'd be interested to hear from you, what is the no vote platform, and who is against expanding from 3 to 5? Because if there isn't a groundswell, I just don't understand why we would go through the trouble of having a townwide referendum.
Again,
I don't know
because
how-
it's, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's because you are changing the way that the citizens are represented in this town. Are they going to be represented by 3 selectmen or 5 selectmen? It's a change, and it's something that the voters should weigh in on. We feel strongly about that. And we think it will probably pass. I don't, I'd be surprised if it didn't. But still, that you should afford the voters of this town to weigh in on how they want to be represented by their selectmen.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to leave, Michael, is this is really only over the summer becoming a big, and I don't even know if it's a big conversation, but it's had some discussion at televised meetings and public meetings. I have heard from some people who are not in favor of it. I've heard from some people who are in favor. I don't know. It's hard to tell because it's such a limited number of people we've talked to on each side, but.
And there's probably a lot of people that don't care.
Yeah, we haven't really spoken of the merits of it. Obviously, there are pros and cons to a 5-member board, and they're laid out in the materials the Government Study Committee presented to us. And the committee clearly feels there's more benefits than there are not benefits. There was some discussion at one of our meetings with the Government Study Committee that having 5 members would allow for more work to be distributed among the membership. And one thing that we've brought up at our various discussions with the committee is that we're going to the strong town administrator. So a lot of the duties are being transferred from the Board of Selectmen to the town administrator, the administrative, the day-to-day management functions, hiring. So there are things that are going to be coming off the Selectmen's meeting agenda. So work is actually going to be decreased for the board. The board's going to become more of a policy board. One town meeting member in May got up and said, what's left for the Board of Selectmen to do?
Governance.
So there are things left for the Selectmen to do, obviously, but there will be less work, less day-to-day involvement for the board. But this will, if you go to 5, one of the concerns we raised with, especially doing this very quickly, since we're in the process of trying to transfer it to a strong town administrator, it is going to mean more work for the town administrator because there'll be 5 people rather than 3 people to communicate with, to report to, and I don't know if you happen to read in the Milton Times, we had a letter to the editor because a news report of our meeting didn't bring out all of the concerns. The main concern we had, which was that at the time there was some back in June or July, there was some talk about doing this very quickly and trying to accelerate it so we could get 5 people elected in April of 2016, and we think there's some real logistical problems with doing that because it would have to be known well enough in advance for people to start thinking about where they're going to run, for the ballots to be printed, and for confirmation as to how many seats there actually would be. But leaving that aside, our concern was that we're trying to go to the strong town administrator. It's going to take some time to implement that. We don't want to have the town administrator taking on all kinds of new duties with a limited staff, and then suddenly having 2 more people to not only report to, but as Zach Blake at the DOR said to me, to manage also. Keep in mind that the town administrator not only manages employees, but has to manage the expectations and the demands of their board. And as it is, the town administrator is in frequent contact with a 3-member board. We are concerned about a 5-member board, and the demands, it is going to increase the communication and the workload on the town administrator to have more people to report to. But so we recognize that there's pros and cons. We've said we're not opposed to going to 5, but we really feel very strongly that this should go to the voters and that they should make the final decision.
Okay, Darnell's next, and then Chuck.
Actually, I'm not opposed. I think I'm not opposed to a 5-man board of selectmen because we can find things for you to do.
I'm sure you can.
In that case.
I'm sure we can too.
We have a lot. But what I am strongly in favor of is putting it out for the town to vote it. Because I mentioned last week about whenever you change the organizational chart here, for the town and how it's governed. It's nice to say we have an elected town meeting, but I think every voter should have the right to be for this or at least vote their dissent to this change. And that's I think that's just their right to do so. When you look, like I said, whenever you make any of these changes, when we go and talk about adding whatever to the, to the town tax levy, whatever, we're voting all these things. And this is as important because now you're talking about changing who governs and tells how that's going to be done and how we're going to run this town. I think you should vote it. And on the recommendation there, in section 3 where it says, come and act as after voted, I would vote to have that changed, to have it go to the town, to set time to do it to the town to be elected, vote a townwide election on it. All right, because that's how I feel. And people, Mike, as you said, you haven't talked with anybody who was against this and everything. I say that's great, and I think it should pass. But I also think on the other side, there are people who want to voice their dissent, and if we don't give them a chance to vote their dissent,
I just haven't met one yet.
No, well, I'm saying we give people a chance to vote their dissent because a lot of people who guarantee a lot of folks, old timers and stuff here in this town, and probably even some younger, who don't want this to happen because they feel it changes the fabric or whatever of their Milton. And if we don't give them a chance to vote their dissent, they'll feel slighted in the thing. What I'm saying, take it to a townwide vote. I strongly believe the townwide vote will say, let's do this. I think it brings out more of a debate. We can also, in that debate process, start to kind of uncover a little bit about what we want the new Board of Selectmen and what the new Board of Selectmen duties should be. I think it'd be a great time for some education as well on what the strong town administrator will be and what it mean to the town. So all these type of things, these educational opportunities do come out when we start and have an election and when we start doing these things. So I think that's important that we do these and take the town through this process, if not only for that reason as well.
Thank you. Chuck?
I support, obviously, the article, and I appreciate the extended time to 2017. What I'm struggling with is, in my mind, it is a much more significant change to go to a strong town administrator than it is to go from 3 to 5 selectmen. And correct me if I'm wrong, the going to a strong town administrator was just a town meeting vote. That didn't go to the voters, correct?
It was, I questioned
correct.
the same thing.
And so,
Was overruled on that, but I would have preferred that the town administrator have gone out as well.
Please,
Comment on.
please.
The town administrator is appointed by the Board of Selectmen, works for the selectmen, and answers to the selectmen, who are still ultimately, the buck still stops with the Board of Selectmen because we have the power to hire and terminate the town administrator. But it's an operational role. It's the day-to-day administrator role. It's not a policy-setting position. The board is still going to be the policy-setting entity that will direct to the town administrator what the policies are that we want the board wants the town administrator to carry out. So it could have gone, and we said we weren't, really, at different times we've said we weren't opposed to that going. We didn't think it was necessary. We were actually, when Phil will probably remember, we met with a member of the MMA, Charlie Cristello, who was a former Milton resident, but a former town administrator, town manager of towns. And he and others at the MMA or the DOR had told us that, and this is a new process for all of us, that usually the legislature will determine whether, if an article or home rule petition comes into the state legislature and it doesn't require a voter referendum, that sometimes the legislature would require it to go to a strong town administrator or a town manager, but that the practice had been that they usually required it, but it had changed at some point to not requiring it in recent examples. And I don't know how recent that was. So we had some debate about it, we had some discussion, and there was an effort at town meeting. there was a motion made by a town meeting member to, and it was defeated, to send it to the voters. But this is an elected board, whereas the town administrator is an appointed administrative position. This is an elected policymaking board. And, the Government Study Committee, as I said, presented some advantages and disadvantages. We just think that it's going to be a different dynamic on the board. There are advantages such as 2 members could talk outside of a meeting, broader diversity of views. There's a few others. Disadvantages are the increased workload on the town administrator, and possibly the fact that because you can have 2 members having deliberations or substantive discussions outside of a meeting, that's a little bit less transparent than it would be. Regardless of how you think on any of those arguments, our point is it's going to be a different board, and it's a big change for Milton, and we think it should go to the voters, and people may disagree with us, but that's our collective strong feeling, that the voters should have a chance to weigh in on this. We don't think there's necessarily going to be a delay. We think it's very possible that it could go on the April 2016 ballot.
Forgive me, Phil, you talked about this last. So for the towns that made the change that had a representative town meeting, was it about 50-50? Did most just go through town meeting, or did most go to a referendum?
Well, it was a pretty even split, but most of those communities, if you remember, or a lot of those communities were small, and they had open town meetings, not representative town meetings. Some of them had the vote at a special town meeting of an open town meeting, so there were very few people who showed up. The practice is, the requirement for a townwide vote is not present. Town council has confirmed that in communication to us today. It's not required. But it has been required by the state on occasion when they felt that the group making the decision was not very representative. Sudbury had a special town meeting of an open town meeting, and there were 150 or so people who showed up, and the state, I think, properly said, I think we need to have a better sense of the community's view in doing that. But Milton has had a representative town meeting for many, many years, and we have a very, if you want to use the word, professional, knowledgeable, and experienced group of people in that town meeting who have at least as deep a sense of the traditions of this community as the voting public at large does, probably more so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Lee Michael?
I was interested in hearing from Peter.
Oh, we all are.
Well, I guess the question is, do we need to separate, our own internal deliberation from taking testimony from other people?
Well, I really
Right.
wanted to hear the perspective of the majority of the Town Government Study Committee as to why the majority recommended a town meeting vote versus a town-wide referendum.
That would be testimony.
Well, I think our own internal deliberations will be better informed, perhaps after we hear everybody's view. I mean, Tom has spoken, and Katie, thank you for coming. We also have Anne Marie Fagan here, our strong,
Yeah.
our soon-to-be strong town administrator. Well, she's always been strong, but
Stronger.
and I don't know. I mean, the only observation I have right now is that, there are many arguments for 3 or for 5. I mean, I would certainly hope that a well-regulated board of selectmen, whether they were 3 or 5, would try and minimize the redundant communication between the town administrator and the 3 or 5 selectmen. But that would just be my thought, that that should happen.
It's necessary,
redundant.
I mean, especially as you're transitioning in, we speak at least every day, many times, multiple times, 8 day. And it's the only way to communicate amongst ourselves at times, is through the town administrator as an intermediary, if you will. But yeah,
Well-
the communications are voluminous.
Yeah, I would disagree that it's redundant. I mean, it's important that each of the members knows certain things that the town administrator needs to report to the board, especially with a weaker and obviously, when we say weaker versus strong, we're talking about the duties of the position. I always want to say that because sometimes people think we're talking about an individual, and we're not. But the weaker town administrator position, it's probably even more communication heavy than it would be under the strong town administrator. But, I work with a lot of people who have served as selectmen, moderators in other communities. I happen to talk with one person who's a two-term member of the Winchester Board of Selectmen, and that's a 5-member board. And I said to him, how are the 5 members of the Board of Selectmen talking to the town administrator frequently, and they have a very strong town manager, or, because we had heard, from one community that possibly only the chairperson talks to the town administrator and then goes out and communicates with the other selectmen, which would actually create, we think, a serial conversation or an open meeting law issue. And his response was, there are a lot of times when the town administrator is talking to 5 people every day, and that's the job. They've got to do it. They've got to deal with it. Even though they're a strong town administrator and they have a lot of authority, they need to update the board on what's going on, because the board sometimes is hearing from residents of the town if there's a problem or if there's an issue. And so the communication is necessary. There are some days when we're not in touch with the town administrator, but especially the year that whoever's the chair in a given year, it's pretty much a daily, and multiple times a day. When you're not the chair, it's, sometimes it's a day or two where you're not talking to the town administrator in a given week. But it's Tom's right. It's frequent, and it will be whether it's 3 versus 5. That's just
And that is a good point,
that's really
too.
the duty of the elected officials, I think, to be in frequent communication. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone in the position who's not going to be in pretty frequent contact with the town administrator. It's really part of the job.
You don't realize the amount of time, and Katie made a good point, that the selectmen hear from the constituency, and that's many times daily, so that you are trying to handle things, and typically the most efficient way to do that is through the town administrator. A constituent will ask for something to be done, or why this wasn't done, or and it again, it's constant, it's every day, and in many cases, and again, that's communication back with and that will still continue. That you will go back to your town administrator and say, hey, deal with this, will you?
Maybe the town administrator needs an assistant.
Or 3, yeah.
It's a smaller staff than it used to be in the town administrator's office years ago, so, and that is a concern. That was one of our concerns with making sure that this wasn't happening too quickly, and that we were which the government study committee was willing to work with us on, to at least say no earlier than April of 2017. So that was a compromise that we reached to address our concern about the immediacy. 2 changes happening very quickly at one time. We believe, regardless of how other town, and I know Phil did some research on some other towns like Hamilton and Norwell. I think those are distinguishable because they're much smaller towns. But regardless, there's examples on both sides. There are other towns where there was a longer delay. Regardless, we have to do what's best for Milton. And as the current elected board, our concern was that we not have too much happening at once, largely because of staffing issues, but also because of the number of projects and things that are going on in town and other changes that are happening. And we wanted to make sure that we want to get the strong town administrator right. If it fails at the end of the day, then shame on us. The buck stops with the board. Whoever's on the board at any given time, that's where the buck is going to stop. We wanted to get that done, and we appreciated the government study committee hearing us on that and taking that into account.
Yeah, and in Milton, it's going to be a tougher transition than in a lot of towns, because we still have many, many other elected boards that the town administrator, even strong as they may be, will not have control over, because those people are reporting to boards, and that will hugely frustrate a strong town administrator in trying to carry out that role. I mean, the selectmen are going to be setting policy, and you're going to be giving marching orders to a town administrator that is going to, have to delicately deal with those issues. How do I accomplish this? I can't just tell that person to do that because I don't have any control over that person. Most towns don't have that.
That was, for what it's worth, and here, that was part of our argument to the government study committee, that we didn't view this change as being the most significant. We really view the financial operations of the town, the future role of the personnel board, things like that, as being changes that we think are more immediate to strengthening
The
the role of
consolidation
the
of the
town
workforce.
administrator and dealing with, and supplementing getting the strong town administrator in place and making it firmly take root before we took on this type of change. Obviously, the government study committee disagreed and we had asked at one point the government study committee not put this forward now, but hold it off for a while. They have the authority under the October 2013 warrant article to submit warrant articles, and we recognize that they had the authority to bring this forward. What we tried to work out was to at least delay any implementation date if it passes.
Well, according to the terms of the current article, and all the recommendations, there wouldn't be any more than 3 selectmen until June of 2017?
Well, April will be the election, so technically April.
May
Yeah.
1st, 2017.
Mhm.
So that's a year and a half. That gives the process of adapting to the new strong town administrator environment some running room.
Depending upon when we get the home rule petition back, so that we can start the transition process. I mean, we have started a little, what we can do of it slowly, but we can't fully transition until we have a home rule petition signed.
Did that home,
It's being heard
what's
tomorrow.
the status? It's being heard tomorrow,
Mhm.
so that's
It's good news, yeah.
optimistic.
I thought it was delayed.
No, the other one was delayed. Mine was delayed, and then they put it back on for tomorrow. So I am going tomorrow to speak to,
Oh, really?
yes,
Good luck.
thanks.
What is this,
Okay.
what time is it?
We don't know. It starts at 11 and runs to 3, so it's any time.
It's any time between that time?
Yes. Yeah, so we'll be there for the duration.
Well, this is, I hope that goes well.
Yeah. Oh, if you just indulge me, David Burns was not able to be here tonight. He had a prior commitment, but he did